All right, now let me just refocus. I think now we can start to look at the interpretation, some possible interpretations of the poem. Remember, interpreting a poem is it's not set in stone. This is just one person's interpretation. The best poems continually give meaning. The first thing for me that's so important is that you understand what's actually being said in the poem. And then you can find ways of interpreting it in your own way. And hopefully you'll be reading more poems than the poems in this cluster over the course of your life. So the title. Let's just skip over the title, actually, because I think I want to dig into what's actually going on in the poem before I talk about the title. So, if we look at the first stanza, for years afterwards, the farmers found them, the wasted young, turning up under the plow blades as they tended the land back into itself. The phrase that strikes me right away is the wasted young. It seems to me that farmers are turning up bodies when they're digging up the earth to plant their crops. The phrase used here is a strange one: tended the land back into itself. I think that if you wanted to really make your own interpretation, that's a line. Also, because that word into itself gets repeated later on. I'm wondering what that means. But basically, it seems to me that farmers are turning over bodies in the ground. What's of note here is that first phrase as well, for years afterwards. Makes it sound like a story, almost like a once upon a time kind of opening, but not quite. A chit of bone, the china plate of a shoulder blade. Well, the things they find weren't actually bodies. I'm going to cross that out. It's a chit is a small note. It's a little tiny fragment of bone. A chit almost reminds me of a chip, like a chipped plate, a chipped bone, and I think that's not for nothing, because the next image is of a china plate. So we get fragments of bones, fragments of not fragments, but a china plate of a shoulder blade. So actually, even though for me there's that image constantly of a chipped china plate, actually the image being shown here is of the shoulder blade itself, like as if it were a china plate. The relic of a finger. A relic is a holy. It was often holy parts. Holy body parts of saints, or things that saints had touched. There's a religious connotation here, and I think maybe it's somewhat ironic that the fingers of these young, these wasted young, I mean right away, they're wasted, their fingers are holy, and there is also their blown open skulls, to be honest. The blown and broken bird's egg of a skull. We get that alliteration really hammering in that image. But the image, what is it of? It's blown open skull. It's a really fragile image of a bird's egg. But blown and broken is also quite brutal, I think, in my opinion. So this is both a fragile and brutal image. I mean, kind of what war is all about, especially when you think of a skull. They're all mimicked now in flint. Mimicked is imitation for entertainment. Is this meant ironically? I mean, is this entertaining for us? Is this a mockery? I'm going to put a question mark there. Imitated. Imitated? Imitated. I mean, I can't spell. Ironic imitation. Breaking blue and white across the field where they were told to walk, not run, towards the wood and its nesting machine guns. So here again, kids, walk, don't run. there is some sense of teacher, or maybe it's probably more a form of authority, or as if these people told to do this were treated like kids. Guns are themselves presented like as guns are personified into birds, and how they're done, how that's done is just through this verb nesting. So instead of a set of trees with birds nesting in them, there are little machine guns nesting in them, and people were told to walk towards them, not run. Now the earth stands sentinel. Here we get a personification of the earth. The earth is shown to be a human being, and it's standing sentinel like a military guard. Reaching back into itself for reminders of what happened. Like a wound working a foreign body to the surface of the skin. This is a really amazing stanza, and if I could try to unpick it for you, what it seems to me is that the earth itself, the ground, is a military guard, and it's reaching back into itself the same way almost the land was reaching earlier on. They were already tending the land into itself. Now the land itself is going into itself, trying to find out what had happened. It's trying to find out what had happened in the past. And then there's a simile that this thing that the earth is doing as a military guard, trying to go back into itself to find out what happened, is like a wound. If you've ever had something caught into your body, what you may or may not notice is your body tries to get rid of it. And what a wound is doing is working something out of itself. Like if you get, I don't know, a piece of glass. Your body's trying to push that piece of glass out of your body. So here, the earth is trying to reach into itself to find out what's happened. In the same way, a wound tries to push out something to the skin. But in this case, this thing it's trying to push out is a foreign body. And that's a pun, because that foreign body in a human being, in me, would just be a piece of glass. But here, since it's the earth that's been wounded, that plow has wounded the earth, and it's pulling up these bodies, really, to the surface of the skin, but actually that skin is the earth itself. Moving on in the story, we're just presented with an image. It's both narrative and just simply an image. This morning, 20 men buried in one long grave. A broken mosaic of bone linked arm in arm. Their skeletons paused mid-dance macabre. So here we get the image of 20 people in one grave. So it feels like it's going to be a mass grave, which is quite scary. It's a quite negative image. But the image that's presented to us is of a broken mosaic of bone. A mosaic were very popular in Roman times, where all the broken pottery was laying around, and artists would make tiled almost paintings from all these little fragments. I'll put an image of that in the slide. And all these little bones together have formed a mosaic, a kind of picture, and they're linked. This picture is linked arm in arm to suggest friendship, to suggest camaraderie, to suggest something that they were all together. But then the next line is a little bit darker. Their skeletons paused mid-dance macabre. That's another image I'll show you on the slides, but dance macabre was a very famous medieval idea where death, he's dressed all in black and he comes with his sickle to mow down all of us, comes and takes us to the other kingdom. And this was seen, although this was a quite sad and horrific event, the dying, the dance you did with death on the way was referred to as a dance macabre. There's a very famous image of one in a movie by Ingmar Bergman called The Seventh Seal, and I'll put that image on there as well. The dance macabre is both. I don't know if it's ironic. Again, irony is a tricky thing, but I'll tell you what. There are two images at once here. Something horrific and almost something pleasurable. That's confusing to me. Their boots lasted longer than they did. And their heads, which aren't really heads anymore, just skulls, their socketed heads were tilted back in an angle. And when the farmer came upon them, their jaws just broke kind of open. And when this happened, all of a sudden, as if all the songs that these people had inside of them were stuck inside of them, they came forth. As if the notes they had sung have only now, with this unearthing, this coming out of the earth, slipped from their absent tongues. I love that verb slipped, because it really reminds me of the tongues themselves. But it's as if the songs that the soldiers were singing were caught up inside of them when they died. And only now, in being unburied, the jaw pops open and those notes burst out. That's the image that comes at the end of this poem. These soldiers have clearly been dead a long time. But what we don't have a clear idea is, why did they fight? We have a clue in wasted. It seems to be a really stupid reason. Wasted young. It was a dumb reason that they fought. But we're not very clear about it. The other thing is the idea of memory, that actually whatever it was that they died for, and that we don't know about, it fades from us. These people, the past, it goes away. It slips from us. But in a very quick moment of re-encountering a skeleton, the past comes back to life. We hear them sing again. They come back to life. And for me, again, it doesn't have to be for you, but for me, that's what's amazing about poetry. That doesn't happen in the everyday world, that things that are dead come back to life. But in our imagination, in our senses, in the way we experience hallucinations while walking around, in our dreams, these things can happen, and they can mean something to us. Rather confusedly, for me anyway, the poem is titled Mametz Wood. And if you're interested, you can look and find out that actually this is something to do, I'll put it in the frame, this has something to do with World War I and the Somme and all sorts of stuff like that. But I really truly wonder if that, knowing that, gives us any help in understanding what's happened here. And I'm not convinced. It seems to me, if you're writing for the exam, along with the structural things that we've identified, I would recommend you bring it up. But what it seems to me this poem is really about is about memory and what it means to rediscover some moment of death and to think about, well, what actually happened there. And there is now, if we go back, there are some suggestions, not just that they found bodies or skeletons, but that they can remember almost that these soldiers were told to walk, not run, to a forest filled with guns, and 20 of them were buried in a grave. And they were linked arm to arm. They loved each other, even though they were on their way to death. And even though their boots lasted longer than them, or their memory even, we could add, even though that happened, they still have songs, they still have a memory, and they still have a story. And that story comes even when their tongues are chopped off and gone. It comes in just looking at them, and in such a way their song returns.